go beyond borders.
هنا CNN.
He's one of the most instantly recognizable faces in Egypt. An actor with matinee idol status and a social conscience to match.
I don't even call myself a political activist. I call myself a social activist, if you want, but I don't even like these labels. My interest was always, as I told you, was to stand by the youth empowerment.
A man of many talents, some of them very surprising. Is it true that you played water polo for Egypt?
I played water polo for the national team of Egypt. Really? Yeah, I was actually best goalkeeper for a few years as well in like Mediterranean contests and stuff.
This week on African Voices, we meet Khaled Abol Naga. Egyptian actor Khaled Abol Naga takes a stroll through one of London's parks. A beautiful and peaceful setting. It gives him time to think and reflect on what have been a momentous 12 months, both personally and professionally. Microphone, a film he both produced and starred in, has picked up numerous awards this year. But for Abol Naga, there were other events to deal with, as he became one of the people most closely linked to the revolution that swept through his country. Later in the program, we'll discuss that, but first, I wanted to know about how he had started in the profession for which he's best known. You've always said that you knew very early on that you wanted to be an actor.
Not really. I knew at some point, at some moment, that I will be an actor, or let me rephrase that. I walked into a theater at a certain moment when my now mentor, back then was just an actor on stage, turned out to be the professor of the drama and theater at the American University in Cairo back then. I was doing a computer science and teaching assistant schedule when my friends happened to be playing in this play. I went in there and I went in a moment where Dr. Lozi, he was on stage, saying nothing for maybe a whole minute. And there was just a screen behind him with newspapers as part of the play. And I didn't know what was going on, but I felt, wow, there's communication, there's a vibe in the air. And then the audience were clapping, and I didn't know what was going on, but I felt there something is very sacred about being an actor. And I knew that something changed.
Egypt is quite interesting because it has always, for years, almost at the same time as Hollywood came up, the Egyptian cinema started developing. So it's probably one of the few places in Africa or in the Arab world where when you say you want to be an actor, it's not immediately something seen as so far off. Is that how you felt?
So yes, in Egypt, of course, being an actor, working in film business, there's a whole career. Families work in film. Gaffers are famous. Sometimes families are gaffers, and so it's a business, and you have to distinguish between having a business of filmmaking, like in Hollywood or Egypt or Bollywood, and making film that is artistic and that is. That lives and becomes really a classic in the culture, in the sense of a cultural way. I mean, usually if you work in the film business in Egypt and you're making money, you're doing well, you're probably doing a lot of commercial stuff. I started doing that, but at the same time, I kept the balance of having films that has some substance, that would live, and at the same time, of course, like any filmmaker, I want my films to be seen by masses. So it's quite a tricky balance, but I think I did well with that balance so far.
I remember the first film I saw you in Banat Wast al-Balad, in Downtown Girls, and even that felt like, even though it was done with a lighter touch, that it was still in a way challenging the accepted social mores of how those relations between the sexes should carry out. Is that something you do consciously, even when it's not an overtly political message? Do you feel like there is always an opportunity to communicate social change?
Absolutely. And this is what visual storytelling is all about. You're not only portraying a story or a character. Actually, you're not even portraying the environment only. But even if you're not aware, you are portraying much more.
I remember in a lot of the old films, old Egyptian films, you'd see a woman hanging out with boys in the village and then something horrific would happen to her. And in your films, it's portrayed as something normal, as something perfectly acceptable. Do you think that you are providing young girls with an alternative?
I didn't think about it that way, but obviously, again, without being aware, yeah, because we reflected actually characters that are there in the society. They're less and less apparent. They're less and less there, but they are there, and they deserve to be their stories to be told. It's not a conscious decision. Basically, we're trying to be honest to a character or a story, and you know, punishing a character because of their attitude or whatever is never really an honest or a real artist's way of making art. That's not the case with my films, at least.
So I am going to embarrass you now.
Okay.
The Egyptian Brad Pitt?
Oh, please.
How do you feel when you hear that?
The nice thing is that Brad Pitt also does a lot of social work, and I like that about actors. I love actors who are you know, activists socially, and they're not afraid of voicing or their idea, their really opinions about issues, and that's, I think, is very important.
I mean, has it helped you? You talk about this, the credibility. Do you feel like when it's you speaking out, then if that means that it'll be easier for people to listen, then it's worth it?
I'll speak out anyway. I believe that if I don't, I'm not. It's an internal thing. It's not an extrovert thing. It's an introvert thing. If I'm honest enough and expressing my opinions about things socially, politically, I feel better about myself, and I feel that I can actually be a better artist on my own, sitting on my own, writing notes about my character or whatever. I feel much better, and I feel I do that in a better way. Every now and then I'm passionate about an issue that I think has to be voiced. I do that.
I ask about the heartthrob status because I know a lot of actors consider that a burden. So I was wondering, does it affect you when you're making choices in terms of your projects?
It did for a while, but I grew out of it. And I think every actor goes through that, especially when you become like a celebrated actor. And so yes, I always had the fear that I would never make it because my choices were not really on the commercial line. But that balance between having making films that are a little bit commercial, not too far from what people are expecting, but at the same time picking those scripts that still have some core that you are passionate about. And I believe you can do that with any script, but still, if you started with a script that has an issue that you're passionate about, usually you end up with doing films that you're proud of, and I believe that later on time they live longer.
Modern day slavery.